We are live. Well, firstly, thank you everybody who's online joining us here and listening to this exciting session that we've got. We've got two excellent thought leaders. That's how I define them. They've got a lot of great history behind them. I let them introduce themselves, but I think the way I really have enjoyed all my interactions with them is excellent thought leadership. Looking at trends early on, understanding the trends with a level of depth that many of us kind of skip, and then sharing that with the wider world. So we hope that you take away some of those learnings and enjoy the conversation that's going to follow over the next hour. You can ask questions on LinkedIn, so go ahead and put in your questions as they come up, and I'll try and collate. I'll try and keep my sort of one eye there, if you may, on on the questions and try and bring it to this forum and see if we can have the guests answer that. So, with that said, welcome Steve, welcome Sandeep. Why don't we quickly do some introductions? I can see Steve and Sandeep, so let's just go in that order. So Steve, jump right in. Most people know you online, but reintroduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, audience. I'm Steve Zalewski. Most people know me as former CISO at Levi Strauss, longtime security practitioner, about 25 years. And I was known at Levi's for asking the question of the security vendors, how does what you do sell more jeans? As an appreciation that it's a business problem, not a security problem. And what I like to say is, thank you for considering me a thought leader. But what I really think is I try to be the voice of reason so that I act as the balanced connector to think about what the problem is and what we can do in a practical way.
Yeah, absolutely like that. I think there are a couple of points that you make, Steve. Big fan of yours, like I mentioned earlier, voice of reason, and then of course practicality. I think both are excellent, at least in my book. So with that said, let's go over to our second awesome guest, Sandeep. Sandeep is also quite a personality online, runs some lots of communities, been speaking about all the good stuff that's happening in the world of cyber and GRC and AI and what have you. Reintroduce yourself as well.
Thank you, Shashank. Thank you, Steve. Again, it's honor to be on a live webinar with both of you. So Sandeep Wadje here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining from. I work for BNP Paribas, based in London. Been with the bank for 7 years. My focus is emerging technology risks, and I look into cloud, AI, digital assets, threat intelligence, and also participation in various working groups and external forums as a part of my job at the bank. Quite passionate about AI in general, but I think over a period of years, what has really helped me probably get right spotlights on is the intelligence capability we have, because then it kind of transcends into every domain I own and gives me some more visibility as to what to kind of look for in terms of emerging trends.
No, absolutely. I think that your stuff about emerging trends that you mentioned is very, very, very exciting. I learned so much from your newsletters and just the community conversations that you engage in, and talk about a lot of things which is impacting, obviously, in the seat that you're sitting at, a very large global bank, but also just broadly technology adoption in the enterprise. So with that said, since both of you have had enough operational experience, enough thought leadership, enough perspective of what's coming, maybe I'll kick it off with the question that's on everyone's mind, which is the adoption of AI. Right. So if you start thinking about it, AI has been the buzzword. It's not even one of the many. It is the buzzword, right? And everybody's talking and discussing AI all day long, right? And I think it's being done overtly and explicitly in conversations and active projects, and it's also happening behind the scenes. Many folks out there in this universe have started using AI in known unknown ways and taking advantage of it, right? And so what I want to sort of focus on in that exciting era of the both knowns and unknowns is, how do you view it, right? And when I say how do you view it, what do you see as the exciting parts of it, the opportunities, the beauty of this new technology, and where do you see the sort of risks and liabilities, inaccuracies, the sort of agents going rogue type of a problem that we might end up inheriting? So with that said, I'm just going to sort of open this up. Whoever wants to take the first step, go at it, and then let's chat a little bit about it.
I'll let Steve take the charge, and I'll follow him. Yeah.
Okay. So following with the voice of reason and kind of keeping it simple, when I had this conversation around AI, what I say is let's have a definition first, which is in my mind, AI has been around for a long time. Okay. But what we've now got is most people jump to Gen AI when they talk about AI. But I say there's really four stages, if you think about this, or four types that we've gone through. The first one is what I call the machine learning, correlation, right? The ability to take large amounts of data, correlate it together to find interesting things. Now, those interesting things might be important, but it's correlating large amounts of data. It's what the data scientists have been doing for 15 years. We're good at it. We know what it's like. We know the risks. Okay. Then AI kind of went to the next stage, and I call it playing checkers, which is it's able to learn, okay, based on certain discrete actions, what to do. So, automation of a run book, for example, is it knows how to do it. It can do it consistently, right? And like checkers, it'll always win because if it goes first, it knows every possibility. We've worked through that. And so there's the RPA automations and everything, okay? And now we've reached the stage where it's understanding a bunch of information and it's not making a decision per se, but it's giving you guidance. And I call that playing chess. So it's inferring based on lots of context what the likely right thing is to do that will ultimately win. But at every stage, it's not clear. It's a likelihood, right, of the best next step. And we've gotten very good at that as well. And then the last stage, what we've seen is this Gen AI, where I call it a word association game. Given a prompt, given enough data, okay, it tells a compelling story, but it doesn't tell the truth. You ultimately have to look at what it says and decide if it's truthful enough. Okay? That's where AI is in the journey. So when we talk about the speed with which AI is making us go faster, be more efficient, okay, that's great. But when we talk about being effective, all of a sudden we start to run into trouble because that trough of disillusionment around Gen AI, which was, oh, it's going to do my job for me. And the answer is no, it's going to give you an answer, but you have to trust it. And ultimately, it's your job and your name on it, is where I think we see a lot of businesses now going, whoa, 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 whoa. It's not good enough yet because it's not consistently able to tell the truth. So to me, I go, when you think about it that way, then we can decompose it and look at where the successes and the failures have been, both for the business to leverage it to bring efficiency to an organization, but also to effectively sell more jeans.
And I
Thank
think
you.
that the good point you made was again towards the end, which I really love. You keep emphasizing, is like, hey, we all exist here to serve a certain business. That's the end goal, right? That needs to thrive. So even in this context, remember that's your sort of reason for existence. That said, over to you, Sandeep. Tell us what your viewpoint is. You've done a lot of work in this segment. You're looking at AI up close. What's your take?
So, still learning, still learning. I wouldn't say that I know a lot, but I'm just trying to apply common sense on whatever is going on. Let us say that. I'll take a little bit of a different view in addition to what Steve had says, and something this is I picked up in our one-to-one conversation as well, Shashank, is ChatGPT or the generative AI got mainstream attention in November 2022, end of 2022, and it was 7 and 8 years of trial and error, learning about the models, the fine tunings. So, and I categorize those in those three evolutions: the evolution of model, evolution of how data is extracted, processed, and handled, and evolution of how the compute has actually supported both of them in making ChatGPT happen the way it came up. And after it has come up, of course, then the mainstream, and when we say like the whole VC and industry attention or corporate attention has gone there, and now you have such an investment that there are more competitors, there are more players, and the models are getting released every 3 to 6 months. But what you actually have is your understanding of last 1.5 years, because you have never been on that journey where somebody played with the whole thing for 7 8 years. You don't know what their learnings were that you could actually carry forward and make it better. So I think we still have a learning curve, and the biggest, I think, the issue I see is we are carrying that understanding of chat gpt after it popped up in November 2022, thinking I know how gen ai works, but we really don't know where it's going to land in 3 to 5 years, because given the investment and attention, both model data and compute are going to significantly evolve. And what that also means then is that the underlying ecosystem and supply chain is also significantly going to evolve. And one of the things, and I'll just take a pause there, is people realize that too much data and generative AI doesn't work. You don't get the answer that you want. So what you
Right.
do then is smaller data, smaller essentially problem to solve, but solve it to the near perfection, and that's welcome the agents, because that's where that whole, like, what, I'm going to build something that is just going to focus on help desk queries.
Hmm.
I'm going to build something that is going to just focus on analyzing annual reports. Now that is very standardized data, very clear structured available data, and then you are building agents on top of it. So I think that's where essentially I see the progress of the market. But I think we still have a lot to go, and I think one of the realization that needs to happen in the industry is the use cases you talk today are applications tomorrow, and the Gen AI applications you talk today are agents tomorrow. So why not then start working backwards in terms of understanding that a lot of these things that we are talking about use cases today, at some point in time, there are some sort of a self-contained agents that get things done, and how do we then understand that ecosystem supply chain and start thinking about that governance, rather than getting a little bit like lost in whether the data quality issues, whether Gen AI is right or not, but more so around where the evolution is going to go, and how we can recalibrate our approach to it.
Good point. I think you made a couple of different points here, Sandeep, which makes me think again. Going back to thought leadership, you guys indeed are bringing up some very new perspective, both of you. I think what you're saying is that there is a lot of sort of hidden stuff, right? There's excitement about AI, but there's so much that has gone behind the scenes that very few people understand. Perhaps only the builders and those who are deep in the trenches, they know it. And everyone's sort of assuming whatever they're seeing, the final sort of output of that effort, and saying, yeah, this is where we can take it. But there's so much more to learn. You don't know what the trade offs are. You don't know how good it can get. You don't know how fast it can get there, and all that stuff, right? And at the same time, I think, Steve, you also kind of spoke about this, saying that, well, yes, there is a lot of excitement, and yes, it's good excitement, but this is not the first time we've heard about AI. It's going through its newer incarnation, but it has come to this point because of all the prior work that has happened, right? From the earlier machine learning successes kind of building on itself, and today we are at the point we are at. Now, given that, I think what I'm sort of always find it interesting and sometimes struggle with also is as I speak to multiple leaders, right? Leaders like you and builders as well on the other side. There seems to be a healthy amount of both excitement as well as fear, right? And especially when you start taking that at an enterprise level, I think there is definitely a good bit of both, right? There's excitement because people are looking at the potential productivity gains. Everyone's excited about unleashing this new genie, if you may, and do a lot more things that they otherwise have to do manually or struggle with. but at the same time they're genuinely worried. They feel like, hey, what if this thing made stuff up just like ChatGPT does? Like, will I now have new liabilities that I never signed up for? Right? What if some of my vendors, partners, people who are advising me, people that I work with, are actually already using it, and therefore I might already be be sort of subject to it. Any thoughts on that? Like, how do you view it? Especially being in this sort of enterprise worldview that both of you are very familiar with. What's the lens and what's your advice? How should people approach this? How should one view the both risk reward, and what's the sort of good way to think about it?
So there's excitement about what ChatGTP can do. We've been given a new toy. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that excitement that everybody has, right, on opening the new present. But what we're seeing now is skepticism because once we've anticipated the new toy and we saw what it can do, and there's wonderment because it can look like it's really smart, like it can think. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't really understand the underlying mathematics of it, but it looks really smart. Now that we've been playing with it for a year or two, right? Wonderment is now being, moderated by skepticism because now we're realizing it can't replace a doctor, it can't replace a nurse. Okay, it does have certain use cases that are effective, right? Replacing a level one analyst or a level one help desk with a chat bot that sounds human enough or writes human enough that everybody's comfortable with it and there's value. But overlaying that is the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that the security industry is introducing
Mm-hmm.
because of the way that it can be maliciously used. Okay. And so now you've got this overarching thing of, oh my goodness, this data could come up with wrong answers. You can manipulate the models. Okay. So now the industry is simply saying you need more security.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got wonderment, excitement, skepticism, and fear now, right? All playing a role in kind of this maturation of technology.
Right, all at once. Absolutely. Sandeep, what's your take? You're seeing the same
I, I,
thing?
I agree with Steve. I agree with Steve. And I have said this in a number of times. Whenever a new technology innovation comes, I think the default tendency we have is what bad things it will do.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, and number two, then we essentially the good things we do, we also go a little bit far fetched than like replacing doctor. But then you don't find the middle ground, and then middle ground is where the focus is needed. And if you look at, for example, the healthcare example,
Mm-hmm.
the diagnostic data is already produced by machines. I have a Fitbit, it's machine. I have a digital scale, it has a Wi-Fi. So it's already there. Its machine is logging my data. Can I use generative AI to make use of that data much better than that is being done today?
Mm-hmm.
100%. So I think, and that goes back to the whole the use case prioritization framework, or what to do in the first place, because people have misplaced understanding of what Gen AI can do, and then everyone is trying to be like, I know this technology and I think it can do this. Not really. You really need to ask yourself, first question is there industrialized right quality of data available to operationalize the use case you have? And for many, and again, Steve rightly said, many organizations are just jumping into it, fully realizing, by the way, fully realizing that the data they have behind is just not there. Either the data is not there or it's a bad quality. And then those challenges will come. So, and again, fully agree with Steve. The security industry has not done favors because they are inducing more, FUD, thinking this is going to go bad, but it will go bad based on what you feed to it. If you feed it in the limited quantity, you can still control you can make the best use of it. So that's how I look at it. But I think the use cases, and this is where I think the whole the regulations and oversight and the industry conversation is very important, because no one has actually come said, you know what, in healthcare industry, these are the 3 or 5 acceptable use cases today.
Right.
Let us see where we go tomorrow, and then that will set the tone for everyone to follow. But right now it has become some sort of a competitive race, and then people who don't understand it are making, almost like as Steve said, unsubstantiated promises and claims, and that probably then again brings back, not so good reputation to the technology itself.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely valid. Yeah,
Uh,
Steve, go ahead. Looks like you got a thought right there.
yeah, I want to, good thought. And here's the way I say this is what we're seeing, right, is how we think we can use it, right? We have use cases. This is what we think it can do, or we have an expectation. But what we're seeing is the reality of unintended consequences. Okay.
Right.
So it's not so much malicious attack that we're worried about right now. What I advise when I work with companies and others, I simply say, look, what's happening is unintended consequences. They're they're abusing the technology not on purpose, but the expectations for what it can do and then how it actually works, unintended consequences says, ooh, and then they lose trust in the technology. Oh, it did something that I didn't think it would do. And
Mm-hmm.
that's a bad thing. And now all of a sudden, the trust that we've built up by listening to the marketing falls down, right? And so I coach people right now. I go, don't worry about the security side of malicious attack. Make sure you work with the business and really work through the use cases and let them see where the unintended consequences are in non-production before you rush to put the thing into a production environment. Okay. And so longer POCs are actually very valuable now, not to verify that the technology works, but to be able to really explore all the unintended consequences that can result in that business use case for the business to make sure that they can trust it.
Good point. You're saying POCs are transforming from proof of concepts to proof of concept and validate the downsides, right?
And
Effectively.
just to add to what
Yes.
Steve has said, in the same spirit, validating whether the technology delivers the benefits it actually is intended to
Right.
deliver.
Right.
Because if it doesn't, the productivity gains and the cost savings that you promised, you're actually not getting it.
True, 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 true. No, and absolutely. And I think I want to share a small little nugget because, this would be good to get again both your perspectives. We see this on the other side of, being someone who plays in the world of AI and building a tool that promises this. It's a lot of expectation problem, is how I see it. So as both of you have mentioned, what's happened is the industry at large has hyped things to a point where everyone's thinking AGI is tomorrow morning, like we'll have this super intelligence somehow pop up. We wake up tomorrow morning and the world is a different place. But as all of us know, all of us have great hair enough to kind of realize this, that every technology has its course, right? It comes in, it gets adopted, you got to find the right use cases, it matures over a period of time, then it delivers to a certain promise. I think here maybe I sense that there is an expectation and a little bit of getting ahead of where we are at the moment. So, if you look at, yeah, is there a good productivity enhancing tool possibility here for some use cases? Is there like a good co-pilot type of stuff? Yeah, absolutely there is. But is this super intelligence that will replace us all, and run whatever podcast for us in the future, or webinars like this, and talk to each other? Well, a little distance away. I think we've still got an opportunity to have these conversations, right? So I just feel like I think that's the whole bit, that we got to temper expectations and kind of understand the boundaries, right? Boundary of excitement and boundary of all the downsides and demise, if you may. Uh, One bit I want to double click on, both of you picked this up. There was a FUD that's created by vendors themselves, right? And the FUD that is created by our own, sort of fellow members in the profession, right? Where it's like, oh, this is like, don't even touch it. This is a nuclear disaster waiting to happen type of a mode, right? Um, Then there's also talk about adversarial behavior. I see a lot of conversation around, hey, you got to get on the AI bandwagon because AI's got to beat AI because the bad guys are using AI already, right? Like there's a lot of that conversation as well. What do you take of that? How real is that? Are bad guys really using a lot of AI? Are we already seeing inklings of that? I know we've seen some experiments and people talk about these worms being developed using ChatGPT and some rudimentary vulnerabilities being exposed on its own. But how real is that? How big a threat is that? What is your take? What's your kind of 2 cents there?
Synthetic IDs is definitely an issue.
Okay.
We've seen that the sophistication with which bad actors are able to create synthetic identities is definitely a worry. Am I worried about deepfake? No, because humans make way more mistake in business email compromise and those things than AI would ever cause. I think what they are getting better at is probably identity. Definitely is something. It's worrying trend, and seeing lot and lot, and then again I think for whatever reasons, it becomes almost like a targeted FU on corporates to worry. I would worry more if I'm a vulnerable pensioner. I would worry more if I'm going to fall for a romance scam, because this is where actually, and if you see the statistics, the highest amount of money is lost in investment scams, and those investment scams will actually become very very sophisticated, to get attention of vulnerable people, particularly old people, and in United Kingdom, pensioners with access to money which they want to deploy, and same with the romance scam. So I think the will it get the level of sophistication? For sure, uh, but not to the level of scaremongering that is going on. But if you ask me for a very specific trend, having participated in some conversations, closed door, yes.
So, having come from the security side of the house, so to speak, right, and working with the business, I'm going to use the word weaponization. And I hate to say that, but I'm in a war, right, to stop the bad guys from bringing down my company. It's a war.
Right.
In AI and the weaponization of AI by the adversary has been phenomenally successful, way better than my ability to weaponize it for defense. Okay? But now let's take a look at that and understand why, and it was where Sandeep is going. There's a brutal truth, which is the human is the weakest link and will
Right.
always be. Why? Well, humans are trusting, humans make mistakes, and humans are lazy.
All
Okay?
true.
And so, to the degree that social engineering attacks are 80% of my problem, because that's how they generally come through. They don't break in, they log in. And the ability to use AI to create that synthetic identity that makes it almost indistinguishable for me to know means that social engineering attacks are on the rise, the success is going up. And what do I do to stop that? I can't use the same technology, the weapon that they've got in defense, it doesn't work. Okay?
Right.
So this is where when I look at AI on all the flavors of this, and I look at it as weaponization for offense and weaponization for defense, right? Now you see that they've been much more successful because of the brutal truths of the human being the weakest link. And then to your point about deep fakes and the emergence of that, Sandeep said it's an identity and access management problem, right? And if you think about that, there's two stages, authentication and authorization. Do I do authentication that I know that Sandeep is really Sandeep, okay? And then once I know it's Sandeep, then authorization, which is what entitlements, right? Or what can Sandeep talk about, right? That makes sense for him to do based on his knowledge. Whereas when he gets out of his range of knowledge, then I have to reinterpret what he's saying to me, right? What does he know versus what he thinks? In order to do that, right, we use multi-factor authentication.
Mm-hmm.
And authentication is something you know, something you have, and something you are. Okay? And what we're finding is that's not sufficient because we're being fished at the help desks. Okay? And they're basically saying my MFA token isn't working, so now I'm left with trying to authenticate that Sandeep is Sandeep. And I'm either doing that on a phone, or maybe I'm lucky like this and we're doing it on an audio video call or a audio video call, which means multi-factor authentication is now transitioned from something you know, something you have, and something you are to something you know, something I see, and something I hear. Okay? And
Interesting,
from an
interesting point.
IAM perspective, something I see and something I hear is a form of authentication that we are very weak at. And again, they weaponize because they only have to be right once in the social engineering attack and be wrong 99% of the times. And yet I'm obligated to be right as many times as I can because being wrong is a successful attack. So you just want to bring that up because when you look at AI and the security and the FUD, and you kind of break it down a little bit like this as to the weaponization on both sides and what authentication really means to us, given humans are the weakest link, I think people are starting to see now through that kind of a light where the fear, uncertainty, doubt is and where the technology is going to take us.
It's true. It's true. The weaponization is certainly going to increase. Well, that actually brings me to a slightly adjacent perspective that I always think about, um, is the whole risk reward spectrum, right? And I feel that both the defenders and the attackers kind of play with that risk reward spectrum, right? And I make this ridiculous example that, a bad guy, for example, in today's times, um, doesn't find the risk reward payoff to be in favor to go actually and physically go and loot a bank. It's not worth it, right? Just as an example, because you get small amounts of money and the risk of actually getting caught or shot or arrested is too high. So, it's not a crime worth committing. Not saying anybody should go commit such a crime, but I'm just saying, like, in their minds. But a social engineering attack is beautiful risk reward spectrum. You can run at mass, you can run a crossboard. You'll find that one time or two times, as you mentioned, where you get somebody hooked in, and voila, you've got that return, right? So they are definitely trying to use a lot of this AI and other types of technology, not just AI, to kind of hook potential susceptible people in, right? And so from their standpoint, risk reward is in their favor. Yeah, the more risks I can take with technology, the more rewards I go up. Now let's flip to the defender side. In a way, I feel like I think a lot of our risk management, risk posture management at large is sort of driven like that. Which technology do we adopt? This helps us become better. This helps us grow business. This helps us defend better. But then, well, there are trade-offs. In that light, and just broader light, share some viewpoint and, does AI really change the game, or do we keep doing the same sort of risk management, risk posture management from technology adoption that we have always done? Should we come up with some new models, new ways of sort of approaching this risk reward spectrum? Share some thoughts. I'm sure both of you got plenty on this, but
You want to have the first take, Steve?
Sure. I was going to look to you, but I'll take this one. So, again, let's look at it from an attacker's and a defender's perspective here, right? What am I trying to accomplish in an attack? Am I trying to monetize the attack? Okay, meaning, am I just trying to get money from you, Shawshank, directly as a consumer? Or am I trying to, if you're the CFO, get you to transfer money to me? Okay. Or am I trying to damage the company? Meaning, what I don't want is your money. What I want is all the PII data to spew it out to the dark web and damage your brand so severely that your customers will no longer do business with you. Okay. So, what I would call a social attack. Right. An example would be when I was at Levi's. Okay. On the jeans that we wear, there's a patch of leather that has the sizing on it. Well, there are organizations out there, right, that don't believe that leather should be used in clothing and that we should use some form of synthetics. And so for them to damage our brand is very important. And they'll put a lot of time and effort at that. Okay. And then the third one are what I call the nation state. Okay. They are going after the social fabric of our country. And they have a very different perspective about what they want to do. Those are three very different threat actors, okay, that have three very different expectations of what the outcome is that they're trying to do. Okay? My ability to be able to protect a company equally against all types of attack across all the lines of business is no longer really a sustainable intellectual model, right? I can't do that. You can't give me the money. Why? Because security is a friction on an efficient business process. By definition, it's making something that's efficient less efficient. Might be more secure, but from the business perspective, it's a cost of doing business. So now I'm trying to figure out what, from a business impact analysis, are the critical processes in this company that make it a company to stay in business? And relative to that, which parts do I protect and to what degree against the types of attacks that I'm likely to see? And now we're having kind of the emerging conversations around risk and where AI now has a role on both sides of that equation.
Good point. Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll pick up from where Steve left, and I love this conversation, the way we pick up things. Steve talked about identify what's critical and how would you protect it. Now, let me be like devil's advocate and flip it around. If I'm running, and forget about like the institution I work for. Let us say, if I'm running a small bank somewhere in India, how many of my decisions are based on open source data? Almost all. I read Financial Times, I read annual reports, I get market data from different sources, which is not confidential at all.
Right.
So to take what Steve said, and to flip it around, the question I have for a lot of people in the industry, with Gen AI and the level at which we are able to process very good quality structured data, do you really want to create a larger attack surface for the sake of calling it confidential? Because it is actually not confidential. Because a lot of things you do today are actually based on your understanding of information that is coming to you from outside in. It was never confidential in first place. You derived intelligence out of it. So you're making trading based on what? You're doing trading based on same understanding of market data, previous trade history, how the stock has performed. That's all open source. So the notion of confidentiality also needs to be revisited so that you limit that attack surface and then actually focus on what is the critical asset for me, and probably my employees PII, my customers PII, because everything else that has been wrapped today by the industry classed as confidential probably is not confidential. And if you really do that, you will limit your internal attack surface to the systems that really matter, because everything else then actually is linked to some way or other data that should never have been classified as confidential. That is the biggest problem we have in corporate sector today, is people have this, I'm going to classify everything as important, and then the moment you do that, you actually, taken the, what do you say is, the target of protecting like the whole kingdom. Instead you can just protect your capital, and that mindset needs to change, because once that change comes, Steve is absolutely right, you will focus on what really matters in terms of the vital services, the critical infrastructure, and everything else probably is just some sort of public or open system that you shouldn't worry much about.
You have a phenomenally interesting point here, Sandeep, and I've heard this in a different light. By the way, there's a lot of conversation here within the government machinery of how much overhead confidential and classified information creates, because the amount of protection, the amount of sort of things you need to do around it are immense. There's cost to it, and then people have questioned what exactly are we protecting. Like the whole world knows about it already. Right? So I think the same thing you're transacting to a business environment, saying that the moment you increase the volume of important data, right, to protect, and going back to what's sort of threading the needle here with what Steve was also saying, well, that has become the bigger threat surface today, because people are just not after stealing money from you. They're attacking your social reputation. They're going after other kinds of sort of advantages. And so why not reduce it? Make it that smaller set so you can actually focus. You can actually protect that things that is worth protecting, rather than trying to protect the whole universe, right? Because now it becomes only more difficult. Yeah, that's for sure. One piece I want to ask you specifically, Sandeep. You're a banker, a technologist there, driving in a bank. And, I myself also spent years ago now, over 2 decades, a little bit of my early career in banking. And what I've seen with bankers is risk is like fundamental. Everything is measured in terms of risks, right? Like the bank operates on that model, right? Financial risk, market risk, operational risk, everything is risk, right? For that matter, most businesses now function like that, right? Now, there is already a technology risk bucket. There's already an IT risk, cyber risk that has become front and center over the years, right? And this, by the way, is across board, across companies. I'm sure same thing you saw, Steve, and Levi's as well. Every public company's got to quantify that, apart from operational cyber and IT risk. What I want to ask here is, with the emergence of AI, which sort of transcends IT, because it's kind of seeping into all business processes eventually, right? Even as assist or full-blown doer of tasks, is there time to like think of it as a separate risk category, or is that unnecessary? Like, should there be, just like we had IT risk, right? Perhaps there was no IT risk in 1960s or something. Like nobody bothered about it. There was no IT's prevalence, right? So, like, is there time now to start thinking about it? And will, like, next 5 years we'll see a separate category called AI risk or intelligence risk, or whatever you want to call it, intelligent systems risk? Is that something we should sort of surmise and think about?
So the question to ask is, if you adopt an emerging technology and you see a transition of essentially your business process or your core business in net percentage term moving on that particular technology, then you really need to start thinking like, how do I essentially classify or carve out that particular risk. So if from a banking perspective, if we all kind of agree to a certain extent, specifically on, let us forget about front office. If we agree to the fact that back office is a great candidate for automation, risk, compliance, and IT functions and cyber functions are great categories for automation, and then you have AI, which is probably in net terms then empowering 50, 60, 70% of the organization. Then the question is, one, uh, if it's agentic AI,
Right.
you're talking about, then how do I essentially do that agent's governance at scale, which is something, it's a different story, and that's the risk then you want to look at. And I'm being too futuristic, thinking that in 5 years time there'll be like 40, 50, 100 agents actually channelizing, powered by human, handled by humans, but still you're talking about that. Or
So you're saying,
otherwise one
so you're
level
saying how do we
down.
sorry, so you're saying how do we manage our AI teammates, our AI
Yeah, sure,
colleagues?
sure, sure, sure.
Sorry.
So yeah, yeah, yeah. But then you're taking that view, and I accept that I'm
Yes,
being
yes.
too much futuristic. But it's just very interesting, and we're barely into the journey, and I'm sure Steve, you're having conversation, Shashank, you're having conversation, and it's funny that multi-agent orchestration word pops in. It does pop in actually. So it's not like Sandeep Wadje is the first person who used that word. It is, people are already thinking in that direction. So I think it will, in a way, if you look at and forget about how I feel or about what three of us feel, what the regulator feels. And then the moment from a regulatory perspective, if you look at, for example, going back to the way they look at things, like, if you're a systematically important bank and 40, 50, 60% of dependency is on one technology, guess what's going to happen? There will be extremely prescriptive guidance, whatever you want to call it. You call it AI risk, you call it AI explainable model, whatever. But there will be that Bible that everyone will have to follow. So I think we need to see that evolution, but too early, because while three of us are quite engaged, we are exchanging views, we really don't know how much the level of successful adoption would be in a 2 to 3 years time. So that success will tell us where it goes. But I think the first entity to react to such a level of evolution would be 100% regulator themselves, because they are the ones who have the highest obligation, particularly when it comes to systematically important institutions.
Good point. Steve, chime in, please. I'm sure you got a perspective here.
Yes. So this is really insightful here because Sandeep knows, coming from the finance world, risk registers rule the world, right? The chief risk officer has these complex, extensive risk registers based on finance actuarial tables, okay? And they live that. Cybersecurity has a governance, risk, and compliance program, GRC, okay? But our ability to establish the risk, manage the risk, and report the risk is very immature. We don't have the same actuarial tables. We don't have agreed upon risk frameworks yet. It's all emerging over the coming years. And so the way I describe AI here, okay, is AI is both increasing the risk and decreasing the risk. And here's why, okay, which is governance is established security policies. Compliance is demonstrate evidence of your implementation of your security policies to be able to pass a certification, right? SOX, HIPAA, right? You pick the government FedRAMP. So somebody comes in and goes, here's the rules, okay, here's the framework, show me the evidence against your security controls. So say what you do what you say, and you pass. And that's what we've been doing for the last 20 years. And if we get it wrong, we pay a fine, right? You get a material finding for the auditor. You might have to pay a fine. More money comes in because we have to put another security control because we have to have more evidence. That's been what we do. That's what Sandeep does, okay? Well, the last 3-4 years, okay, AI has been great because we're using AI to automate that compliance side. So we're driving efficiency into the processes to get people out to automate the generation of that compliance data. Cool. So now we're being more effective as well as being more efficient. Governance to compliance. But what you're also seeing in the last 3 years, okay, is that people are saying that's not sufficient. You have to establish your risk posture. What's your cybersecurity risk posture? Okay. How are you describing the measurement and metrics of risk from cybersecurity and now demonstrate evidence of risk management? And so how do I demonstrate a risk profile that we don't know how to describe, okay, with automation to do that? And if I get it wrong, okay, as the CISO, I get the unique opportunity to go to jail, not pay a fine, okay? And so this automation in AI is powerful because it can generate a lot more evidence, but I don't know what evidence to generate yet, okay? It's subjective, not objective. And two, to Sandeep's point, most of this data that we've been trying to protect is behind firewalls, right? We have a network edge, we have a soft center, we know where the data is, we protect it because of a firewall. But this third-party risk management that we're talking about is now with the cloud, we've put the data on the edge, okay? We're exposing data directly in the cloud. So my network edge is now having to be augmented with a data edge. And that's a different set of methodologies as an architecture to expose that, right? What does IAM look like where I've got APIs and processes and CI CD pipelines that now have to be protected, but I'm mandated to let all that data sprawl and move? Okay. And I can't rely on the classification and the soft center of my network. And that's where Sandeep and I are struggling, is because transactionally we have to let the data move. And what do I do now? Because your email address, Shashank, okay, depending upon where it is out in the cloud, is either
Mm-hmm.
public data, confidential data, or
Mm-hmm.
PII data. So, how do I contextualize authorization of that same piece of data as it's sprawling out into the network? That's what Sandeep was getting at, which was, so how do we do that now? And that's where AI again is both a strength and a weakness, because I can use AI to embrace the sprawl. And now I have to do more than just classification, but I have to infer classification as I see it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can use it to generate evidence. Yet AI is what's forcing the sprawl of all this data out there at a data service edge that I don't yet have the ability to control.
No, absolutely. And adding to that, I mean, this is again super perspective, very, very well, sort of articulated and well thought out. Both of you, like, bringing in this broader picture of not only that, you have to quantify and understand risk, but risk is sort of more, I would say, distributed. It's not in one place, and I'm trying to, of course, condense that down in single thought. Um, One of the pieces that I'm also seeing with the emergence of AI and third party, like like both of them on the same sentence, is that a lot of third party vendors have already started infusing their products with AI, sprinkling that in, right, to get their own same productivity gains, efficiencies, etc. And so what's really happening is that perhaps enterprises are being exposed to AI risks through their third party, even unknowingly. For example, it could be your CRM vendor, it could be your messaging app, it could be, maybe where you store your data, right? Or some other service provider. And they all have access to your same data, and perhaps it's going out into the public LLMs, or is susceptible to corruption or inaccuracies, but you may not even be aware of it because they haven't very actively either talked about it, disclosed it, or many organizations have not even put together a program to go assess all their vendors, because that's not an AI vendor. Now, if you're an AI vendor and selling AI product, you get assessed for security for AI risk. But if you're a existing CRM vendor, nobody's going and asking the existing CRM, existing messaging vendor, or existing document management software vendor to say, hey, did you put in some AI in there? Did you not tell me about that? And what's the risk? How do you see that panning out over a period of time? Just like software supply chain kind of blew up, everybody started talking about software supply chain after the last few sort of software supply chain centric attacks. Are we going to wait for an attack to happen and then suddenly it become front and center third party and AI risk in this sense, kind of like the underlying risk? Or do you think that there is already going to be a bit of a process and technique
There
that
are
is going to
like I can
go
give
ahead?
some perspective. So there are three parts to it. One is, how do we make sure when a third party starts using AI in their services to us, they tell us. So that is the enforcement
Right.
point. They should tell us. So then you need to retrospectively change the narrative in all your contracts. Welcome to the job. Second is, if you still have a blind spot, how do you, what kind of technology you deploy to discover if your third party actually has been using AI behind the services? Because not all third parties are going to come forward and be honest, right? So how do you then discover if there was some AI behind the services that were provisioned for you? That's the second part. Third part, which is where conversations have happened, and I think they will take shape over a period of next 6 months or so, is, can we have a SOC 2 for an AI third party. So then you already have a third party risk assessment. You extend it to have certain sort of AI scrutiny, and then you essentially tell the vendor, whether you use or not, I assume there is some sort of AI dependency you have. So here is a new certification which includes the AI related questions, because I want to have that, peace of mind and answer that. So this is how essentially. So the first two are very difficult one. The third one, yes, there are industry working groups. There are some conversations going on, and I think everyone is trying to align, saying let us have some sort of a safety standard, and that safety standard can then include everyone. It can include Hugging Face, it can include OpenAI, it can include a third party using OpenAI, but then at least you develop a standard which is some sort of assurance, because otherwise we are going to struggle, because everyone will ask different questions, there will be lack of standardization. So the AI safety AI safety test for third parties is a very relevant topic right now.
Absolutely. Steve, you want to give your 2 cents to this topic of
Sure.
third party AI seeping in?
Yep. So this is insidious, and it's really simple for me. It's not third party. I'm not good at. We've been struggling with third party, and what do? Vendor security assessments, and we write terms and conditions into contracts. That's what we do. How effective is it? Well, we've now matured to getting a SOC 2 Type 2 and issuing that as an alternative to a vendor security assessment, and to prove, right, that we're meeting the terms and conditions of the contract. But all that really is a promise, okay, that nobody believes, because we don't know who wrote it. We don't really know that Sandeep is doing a good job. And I go, so we're struggling with that. Yet the real problem, what we're really doing here with AI and with the data edge, is fourth party risk. It's not, can I trust Sandeep with the SaaS product that he's built? Sandeep's got, okay, a recursive problem of he's got to figure out for all of the third party SaaS services that he's using to hold my data. So how do I not just trust Sandeep, but get visibility into what Sandeep's really doing in a way that I can actively manage the risk? If we do not know how to do that, that's beyond our technical expertise. AI is a facilitator as part of the solution, but right now it's all that data sprawling everywhere in classification, where I'm losing control of the edge of my data. And so how do I protect my company when more and more SaaS means I have less and less visibility? And so while we rely on, right, documentation, terms and conditions, it's the best we can do. It really doesn't address the underlying technical requirements of how can I get near real time, right, evidence of risk management. And that's where we are.
Absolutely. Fantastic viewpoints. I think this could be an endless conversation, obviously. But there is one point I do want to cover before we start sort of converging and wrapping up this excellent conversation, is AI regulation. Okay, and AI regulation has been talked about a lot. I think we've seen, sort of points on either sides of the spectrum. There are people for it, and there are, of course, people saying it's too mature, don't jump into it. Give us your quick take on AI regulation. What do you think of it? Where do you see it headed? Is it going to be helpful at all? Give your 2 cents there.
So I have quite controversial opinion.
Go for it.
Facebook is the biggest AI. Is it regulated? Is it regulated? So the reality is, uh, what we are, and that is the reason, and I've said this, that model is the most abused word in AI right now, because model allows you to create an entity that doesn't exist and then try to create some narrative which doesn't help at all. The reality is, it is essentially a packaged service that's going to be available on a different type of domains that you're going to use in 2 to 3 years time. It is just Google, it is just Facebook. So why don't you accept that reality and start focusing on being at the the service consumer end and then ask from a service consumption perspective, what is that I'm really worried about? I think the regulations are more focused with the kitchen view. That Sandeep is going to take a model and build something on his own, and I'm worried, but that's not going to happen. We all know that. So the reality is, you just start looking at AI as some AI service and consumption of that service and how that service is controlled and monitored, rather than creating that narrative of some fluffy model, which we all know, particularly with generative AI, the level of industrialization and the growth of model is so much that there is no one around would be capable to say, I have just tested this model end to end and I know exactly what's going inside that model. Just not possible.
Excellent.
So I kind of have three perspectives on this, or basically three ways of what's driving this, which was, yes, we need some additional regulatory controls. It's inevitable. And there's three ways of which you're going to see this conversation evolve. The first one is privacy. Okay. The European community is much better at privacy than the US is. Okay. Or even the Asia Pac. Okay. Because we gave up our privacy to be able to get free apps. And now we're clawing back privacy in the US, and the states are doing it, right? And GDPR for Europe has come out, right? So you're going to see regulation as we're trying to put the genie back in the bottle for privacy. Makes sense. The second one is monetization. Okay. There are ways that AI is creating monetization that, again, unintended consequences. Okay. Using Sandeep's images in ways that he didn't agree to, but it had never been an issue in the past because you couldn't do what AI is allowing you to do. So you've got new business use cases around monetization, right? So the musicians, the actors, well, now that's turning into all of us as individuals, right? Want to have control over our intellectual property, which also includes audio and video components, right? And manage our brand, because you can damage the brand. The third one is what I call the consequence, right? Which was legal liability. Okay, what happens if a doctor makes a diagnosis based on AI and he's wrong? Okay, there's a whole bunch of use cases coming up again where what people are realizing is, what's the liability of a driverless car that's using AI and it gets in an accident? That's the third area where everybody is now bringing up these use cases where there's a liability component. And so therefore, how do I manage the liability? Because otherwise we won't use the AI, because we'll never allow driverless cars. Those are the three ways that I broke it down to say, now we can have conversation around legal and regulatory compliance. And I think that's where people are pushing it all into one basket. So it gets really confusing because they're moving across those three domains.
Super. Lots of good points here, all the way from, hold the consumption point accountable as opposed to the developer who's trying to mess around with models, to who's going to pay for that insurance if the autonomous car comes and hits you on the road. These are all like super interesting questions, very pertinent to almost everybody, whether they want to talk about AI or not, right? It's coming, it's here. Well, before we wrap up, one last bit. We'll go perhaps this time in the reverse sequence. We got started with Steve and then Sandeep. So we'll start with Sandeep and then we go to Steve. Parting words for the listeners, and also tell a little bit about where should somebody find you. I had started with a thought, you're sort of thought leaders, and that's very true. There's a lot of good stuff you guys publish, talk about. So Sandeep, why don't you go first? Share some parting remarks on the topic, or anything else pertinent, and also do share where folks who've enjoyed this conversation today can find you.
Sure. So I'll start with the second one. I'm very accessible, busy but accessible, as long as you get who, what, when, where, how right, and get my attention. And I can assure you that I'll respond to whatever request you have. So yes, LinkedIn is the preferred medium to get hold of me, but please make sure that you get those the criteria right. So that's one. Second is Parting remarks, I would say, is the conversation we have had today, and if I give analogy of a human body, let us say you're looking at a corporate risk function, compliance function, IT, your business. Now you ask yourself, you're talking about automation here, you're talking about automation here, you're talking about automation here, but basically the whole body is going through an automation. Have you connected the dots? And that is my biggest concern, is people are not connecting the dots as to how this automation is going to merge together and what that means in terms of, let us say, the digital evolution 2.0 or 3.0. Because we are cyber risk experts, we talked about cyber and risk. I can assure you, there is generative AI medical diagnostics working group, where they are talking about how do you take medical diagnostics using AI to the next level. But I think somewhere in the industry we are not essentially doing a good job in mapping those tipping points, and what does that mean in terms of our digital life or digital life cycle in 2 to 3 years time. Because that GenAI race is on, everyone is trying to adopt it, but it's going to cross connect, and that cross connection clarity, we need to build good knowledge, and we need to be really in a better position to tell it to our executives, because everyone is looking at for their benefit, for their point in time story. No one is taking that holistic, can I step 10,000 feet and understand what's going to happen in 3 to 5 years time.
Good point. Um, Over to you, Steve.
So you can find me on LinkedIn, right? I tell everybody that kind of is the yellow pages for business, right? And so that's where we are. I have an advisory practice, so I work with security companies on go-to-market. I have a retained CISO practice, so I work with companies that are trying to figure out what is reasonable security, right, for the friction and what to do. I'm an investor, so I touch pretty much all of the market, and I enjoy doing that. And today, thank you for giving me the opportunity. What I would leave as parting thoughts is having an engineering background, right? The hardest part of any problem is it looks too big to solve. And I think hopefully what we've done today is taken some of these large concepts like third-party risk and AI for risk and had a chance to kind of decompose them into, kind of tractable problems, ways to think about the problem where you can make some reasonable decisions on managing the risk. Okay, and ultimately that's what you want to do for the use of AI for efficiency, effectiveness, protection, right? Betterment of society. And that's what we've done. So a lot of this voice of reason for me is simply applying that kind of a methodology to go, let's just talk about assumptions. Let's talk about requirements. Let's break it down to how we can actually have a conversation to make some progress, not just wring our hands about it's too hard and we don't know what to do. Because as a security practitioner, I had to get stuff done, right? So thank you to the audience for giving all of us, the three of us, the opportunity to kind of have this really solid conversation around something that a lot of people like to have opinions on, but don't necessarily have a lot of practical recommendations on.
Absolutely. So, on that note, thank you for joining, all of you who joined us live, and thank you very much, both Steve and Sandeep. I think I learned a ton. Really enjoyed the conversation, and like I said, the hour had passed, and we could keep going on. Maybe we'll have an episode 2 of this at some point in time in the future. But thanks again for today. Thanks for joining. Thanks for taking out the time from your busy schedule. Appreciate it
Thank you
very
so
much.
much. Thank you. Thanks a
Thank you,
lot. Thanks.
Sandeep. It was awesome. Appreciate it.
Bye.